Welcome, curious minds, to the Book Triangle podcast. I'm Dev.
And I'm Kavya.
Whether you're meticulously preparing for an Indian competitive exam, or maybe you just possessed an insatiable curiosity about India's rich past, you've landed in the right place.
That's right.
Today, we're continuing our Navigating Modern India series. It's a journey, really, through the pivotal moments that have shaped this incredible nation.
And today we're diving into something really significant. Our focus is Unit 3, Chapter 6, or rather, Chapter 7 in the book, The Revolt of 1857. We're using Modern India by Spectrum as our main guide here.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource.
It really is. And this chapter, well, it isn't just a chapter, it's a profound historical crucible, a moment that, irrevocably altered the course of British rule.
Absolutely.
And it really laid the groundwork for India's long struggle for independence. Understanding 1857 is just, it's critical to grasping the trajectory of modern India.
Couldn't agree more. If we cast our minds back a bit, British power under the East India Company, it really began to solidify after their victory at Plassey, right? 1757.
The centenary.
Exactly. That marked the beginning of 100 years where this slow, simmering pot of discontent, just a whole myriad of grievances, was steadily brought to a boil.
A very slow boil, but getting hotter.
Definitely. And by 1857, that pot finally erupted. You can only really describe it as a violent storm. This wasn't just another local uprising, or some minor incident.
No, far from it.
It was seismic, an event that absolutely compelled the British to fundamentally rethink their entire approach to governing India.
It led to huge policy changes, didn't it?
Huge, lasting changes. It's a turning point that echoes through history, even today.
And that's a crucial distinction to make right at the start. What's often overlooked, and what our Spectrum source really emphasizes, is that the Revolt of 1857 wasn't some spontaneous, isolated event that just popped up out of nowhere.
Right, it had deep roots.
Deep roots. It was the cumulative effect, as the book puts it, of 100 years of British policies. Policies that had systematically alienated vast segments of Indian society.
A century of buildup.
Exactly. We're talking about a relentless march of expansion, aggressive economic exploitation that completely reshaped livelihoods, and a whole series of administrative innovations.
Innovations that weren't always seen as improvements, I guess.
Well, yeah. While maybe framed as modernization, more often than not, they just dismantled traditional social, economic, political structures, and they didn't offer viable or, culturally acceptable replacements.
So it created instability.
Huge instability. Imagine an entire society being slowly, systematically destabilized over generations. That's the undercurrent we need to explore here.
And what's particularly striking, and maybe often misunderstood, is how widespread this discontent was. It wasn't just confined to one single group, like, say, the soldiers.
Not at all.
It permeated the entire social fabric. It cut across sections of society you might think were totally separate.
Give us an example.
Okay, well, consider the rulers of the Indian states, the Nawabs, the Rajas, powerful figures. They found their sovereignty just eroding away. Their dignity undermined, their territories often just outright annexed. Policies like the subsidiary alliance or the infamous doctrine of lapse.
We'll definitely get into those.
Yeah. These policies were designed, essentially, to absorb princely states into the growing British Empire, often leaving ruling families disrespected, displaced, powerless.
Precisely. And then right alongside them, you had the sepoys themselves, the Indian soldiers serving in the British East India Company's army.
Yeah, you might think they were privileged.
On the surface, perhaps.
Yeah.
But they harbored their own deeply felt grievances, which we absolutely need to unpack. And beyond them, the traditional landholders, the zamindars.
Right, the established landowners.
Their long-established rights, their influence, often systematically eroded by these new British revenue settlements. These new systems frequently favored newcomers or British collaborators.
Fishing out families who'd held land for generations.
Exactly, undermining the traditional hierarchy.
It really was this cascading effect, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Rippling through every single layer of society. The economic transformations driven by British policies, they hit everyone. Think about the countless traders and artisans, their traditional economic fabric, their crafts, their markets, systematically destroyed.
How did that happen mainly?
Mostly through the influx of cheap, mass-produced British manufactured goods. And, a deliberate policy of deindustrialization in India. It effectively wiped out local industries.
Their livelihoods just vanished.
Forcing so many into utter destitution. And it didn't stop there. Even the spiritual and intellectual leaders, the pundits and Malvis,
Their authority was challenged too.
directly. Their socio-religious authority, their influence, challenged by British reforms, and importantly, the relentless activities of Christian missionaries.
Which caused a lot of alarm.
Huge alarm. This wasn't just about their income. It felt like an attack on their very way of life, the moral fabric they upheld.
What's truly fascinating, and a critical insight from Spectrum, is how this widespread, multifaceted discontent, reaching from the highest nobility right down to the common peasant and soldier, how it all converged.
Yeah, it created the conditions.
Exactly. It laid the essential groundwork for such a massive, sudden upheaval. It wasn't, a singular spark in an empty field.
No, it was like a tinderbox.
A very full tinderbox. A complex confluence of many deeply felt, long-standing grievances, all accumulating pressure until the system just couldn't hold it anymore. This deep societal preparation is why the revolt had such incredible reach and ferocity when it finally broke.
Okay, let's really unpack these major causes in more detail, starting with the economic factors. Because, let's face it, these directly impacted the daily lives, the sheer survival of millions of Indians.
Absolutely fundamental.
Our source material from Spectrum is very clear. Colonial policies absolutely shattered India's traditional economy. They created widespread distress, resentment. It was systemic.
And what was at the core of that economic disruption?
Well, primarily the introduction of new and, crucially, highly unpopular revenue settlements. The British brought in various systems: the permanent settlement in Bengal, the Rayatwari system in Madras and Bombay, the Mahalwari system elsewhere.
Can you quickly break those down? What was the main difference?
Sure. So the permanent settlement basically fixed the land revenue demand permanently with the zamindars, who then acted like landowners. The Rayatwari system went direct, collecting revenue straight from the cultivators, the Rayats, no intermediaries.
Okay.
And the Mahalwari system collected from village communities, the Mahals, who often held land jointly. Now, while these might sound like attempts to streamline things,
In practice,
they led to incredibly heavy taxation, just crushing taxes that impoverished the peasantry. Farmers, often living right on the margins anyway, were frequently forced into taking loans.
from moneylenders.
Exactly. Moneylenders and traders, often at outrageous exploitative interest rates. You can imagine the cycle of debt this created. Inescapable. One bad harvest could ruin a family for generations.
And here's where it gets even more insidious, right? The role of those moneylenders and traders.
Yes, because these very people, who often acted as intermediaries or even collaborators with the British system,
They ended up benefiting.
hugely. They eventually emerged as new, powerful landowners themselves, and the immediate consequence: they systematically evicted peasants who couldn't repay their debts.
Turning farmers into landless laborers.
Precisely. This fundamentally ripped apart the established traditional land relations that had existed for centuries. It led to the disintegration of the older zamindari system, throwing countless families into severe economic instability, destitution.
And the long-term impact.
It's still felt today. Spectrum tragically highlights this as the enduring scourge of landless peasantry and rural indebtedness. It's a direct line, an unbroken line from those company policies in the 1850s to major socioeconomic challenges that still plague parts of Indian society now.
So it wasn't just about taking wealth in the moment.
No, it was about fundamentally altering the entire economic landscape for generations to come. Deep structural change, mostly negative for the masses.
And that economic devastation, as profound as it was just one piece of the puzzle. It was compounded, wasn't it, by the relentless political maneuvers of the British?
Oh, absolutely. Their policy of annexation and expansion was incredibly aggressive. They used all sorts of pretexts, some flimsy, some outright deceptive, just to absorb Indian states into their ever-growing empire.
What were their main tools for this?
Well, one primary tool was the subsidiary alliance. A very cunning policy, actually.
How did it work?
Ostensibly, Indian rulers were offered British protection. But it came at a huge price. They had to maintain a British force within their own territory, pay for it, and crucially surrender control over their foreign affairs.
Effectively losing their sovereignty.
Completely. Powerful states like Hyderabad, Mysore, Travancore. Despite their history, they basically became subservient puppets of the British through these alliances.
And then there was the other big one, the doctrine of lapse.
Ah, yes. The truly notorious doctrine of lapse, mostly associated with Lord Dalhousie.
What did that policy state?
It dictated that if an Indian ruler died without a natural male heir, a biological son, his adopted son could inherit his private property, sure, but not the state itself.
So the state would just...
It would lapse,
Yeah.
automatically annexed by the British paramount power. This led directly to the annexation of key states, Satara in 1848, Sambhalpur in 1849, Kansi in 1853, Nagpur in 1854.
You can see how that would cause immense resentment.
Immense. Indian rulers, the populace, they saw it as a blatant disrespect for their traditions, their lineage, religious customs around adoption, their inherent right to rule. It felt like legalized theft. It just destroyed any trust in British intentions.
You can just sense the political tension ratcheting up with each annexation, each treaty.
Definitely. And the British also systematically worked to diminish the once mighty Mughal dynasty. Remember, the emperors once commanded vast power, symbolized India's historical unity.
But the company reduced them.
Gradually, yes. Reduced them to mere pensioners, stripped of all real authority. You see it with figures like Akbar II. He was so broke he had to give the title of Raja to Rammohun Roy just to send him to England to plead for a better pension.
Wow.
And the ultimate indignity came to Bahadur Shah II. He became the last Mughal emperor, but he was just a symbolic figurehead in Delhi. And after the revolt, exiled to Rangoon, died there in 1862. It marked the formal end of a centuries-old imperial legacy,
A deliberate stripping away of dignity and authority.
seen by many as a deep insult to India's past glory.
And it wasn't just the Mughals, was it? The Peshwaship suffered a similar fate.
Right, the hereditary prime ministership of the Maratha Empire, which had become this powerful symbol of Maratha might. Nana Sahib, the adopted son of the last Peshwa, Bajirao II,
He was denied his title.
denied his family title, denied his substantial pension, and effectively banished from Pune. This act of disrespect was deeply felt, not just by Nana Sahib, but by everyone who revered the Maratha legacy.
So it's no surprise he became a key rebel leader later.
Exactly. Seeking to reclaim what he felt was rightfully his, avenge the insult.
And perhaps one of the most politically charged annexations, the one that really acted as a major trigger, was Awadh or Oudh.
Yes, 1856. Done on the remarkably flimsy pretext of misgovernance.
Despite Awadh being a loyal British ally for decades.
Right. It was seen as a profound betrayal, and it deeply offended a huge portion of the sepoys in the company's army.
Why them specifically?
Because so many of them came from Awadh.
Hmm?
They had strong personal ties to the nobility there, to the deposed Nawab, the displacement of the Awadhi nobility, the dissolution of its administration. It fueled widespread anger.
Especially among those serving the very power that had wronged their homeland.
Exactly. This annexation really hit home for the sepoys, blurring the lines between their military duty and their personal loyalties, their sense of justice.
Okay, so we've got these huge economic pressures, these aggressive political moves. What about the day-to-day administration? Did that contribute too?
Massively. Shifting from the grand political schemes, the administrative causes played a huge role in fueling widespread discontent. Our source mentions rampant corruption within the East India Company's administration.
And this wasn't just abstract, right?
No, it was a daily reality for ordinary people, particularly bad in the police force and the lower judicial systems. Interactions with authority often left common people feeling exploited, powerless, deeply cynical about British justice.
Imagine having to bribe officials for basic services, or just to avoid harassment.
That was the reality for many. And it wasn't just the corruption. The new land revenue systems we touched on, permanent settlement, Retwari, Mahawari, they had massive, often unintended, negative consequences.
How so?
They led to a fundamental loss of traditional rights to land. They placed an increased, often unbearable burden of taxation on the peasants. And they created this pervasive sense of insecurity about land ownership.
So people who'd farmed land for generations suddenly felt precarious.
Exactly. Subject to new, often arbitrary, British rules and collection methods. It created a profound sense of injustice and fear about their future, their family's survival.
And the justice system itself.
Then there was the alien nature of British justice. It was a system that was often incredibly complex, prohibitively expensive, baffling to the average Indian, used to more local, community-based ways of resolving disputes.
And crucially,
It was widely perceived, often rightly so, as favoring the British and their collaborators, the new landlords, the moneylenders.
so if you were a peasant struggling under debt,
Seeking justice through the British courts often meant more loss, more humiliation, deeper disenfranchisement. It solidified the belief that the system wasn't for the common Indian, but for perpetuating colonial power and enriching its allies.
these administrative issues, the constant friction they cause, they must have blended seamlessly with the socio-religious grievances.
They absolutely did. There was this prevailing, palpable fear among Indians that the British were engaged in a systematic, deliberate attempt to destroy their traditional religions and cultures.
And this wasn't just paranoia.
No, it felt very real, constantly reinforced by various British policies and actions. Consider specific measures like the abolition of sati in 1829, or promoting widow remarriage through the Act of 1856.
Which we see as progressive reforms now.
Right. But at the time, for many orthodox sections of Indian society, they were seen as direct, unwelcome intrusions into their long-held religious customs, their deeply ingrained social practices.
Perceived as disrespect, not improvement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Disrespecting traditions and beliefs rather than coming from a place of cultural understanding. This created immense resentment among those who felt their spiritual and social fabric was under direct attack.
And it wasn't just those internal reforms sparking outrage, was it?
No. The blatant government patronage given to Christian missionaries, that was a huge factor.
Their conversion efforts caused alarm.
Immense alarm. Coupled with their often aggressive proselytizing, many Indians genuinely saw it as a direct, organized assault on their faiths, a deliberate attempt to convert them.
And adding fuel to that fire
Was the taxation of mosque and temple lands. That was seen as nothing short of sacrilege, directly impinging on sacred religious endowments, their institutions, eroding their financial independence and spiritual autonomy.
Yes, and then there were laws like the Religious Disabilities Act of 1856. How did that fit in?
That act specifically modified Hindu customs. It allowed converts to Christianity to inherit ancestral property, a right they would traditionally lose upon conversion.
So it looked like an incentive to convert.
Precisely. Deeply unsettling to many. It seemed to undermine the social structure tied to religious identity by removing traditional penalties. So you combine all these things: perceived attacks on customs, promoting Christianity, taxing religious lands, laws favoring convert.
It created this profound sense of apprehension and outrage.
Across a wide spectrum of the population, yeah. This pervasive fear of cultural and religious annihilation united many in their distrust and opposition to British rule.
It seems clear the British were consistently, almost blindly, underestimating the depth of these religious and cultural feelings.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just internal policies stoking the flames. The influence of outside events also played a role, maybe more subtle, but psychologically significant.
How so?
It diminished the perception of British invincibility. Up until around this time, the East India Company had largely projected this image of being an unstoppable, triumphant force.
That started to crack.
It did. Their defeats, or even just costly struggles in other wars, far from India, began to chip away at that illusion of unchallenged power. For instance, their major setbacks in the First Afghan War, 1838-42, that was a humiliating defeat for the British.
Observers in India would have noticed.
Definitely. Questioned their military might. Similarly, the hard-fought Punjab Wars, 1845-49. They were British victories eventually, but costly, and they showed the strength of Indian resistance.
And even wars further away.
Even the Crimean War, 1854-56, thousands of miles away. The British faced significant challenges, made strategic blunders. Astute observers in India noticed. These perceived failures, spread through rumors and news, likely encouraged some to believe they could be defeated.
Gave them a glimmer of hope.
Exactly. Emboldened those harboring thoughts of rebellion, made the British seem less invincible.
And that perceived vulnerability, real or imagined, must have fed into the discontent among the sepoys, too.
For sure. Because while the sepoys were part of the British military machine, enjoyed certain privileges maybe, at their core, they were Indians.
They shared the same grievances as civilians.
Many of them, yes. Social, religious, economic. Their discontent wasn't just about military life. It was tied to their identity, their families, their culture.
And within the military itself, what were the specific issues?
Well, racial discrimination was rampant, deeply felt. Indian sepoys consistently got significantly lower pay, fewer allowances, and had virtually no chance of promotion beyond junior officer ranks. Didn't matter how skilled or brave they were.
A rigid glass ceiling.
Totally. Breeding resentment, a sense of being second-class soldiers in their own land.
What about allowances?
Adding to that was the refusal of the Foreign Service Allowance, or PATA. Sepoys were increasingly required to serve in remote regions, sometimes overseas like Burma, considered beyond the Black Waters.
But no extra pay for that?
Nope. Despite it being costly, hazardous, and culturally very disruptive, especially the sea travel part.
Which leads us to the religious objections.
Exactly. The General Service Enlistment Act of 1856 was a huge flashpoint. It required all new recruits to be ready for service both within and outside India, including crossing the sea.
And for high-caste Hindu sepoys.
Crossing the sea meant loss of caste. a deeply ingrained religious and social belief carrying immense spiritual and communal penalties. This act directly challenged their fundamental values, forcing an impossible choice between service and belief.
And this wasn't the first time issues like this had flared up.
Not at all. There was a pattern. The Vellore Mutiny in 1806 triggered by dress code changes, replacing the turban with the leather cockade. And in 1824, sepoys at Barrackpore revolted when ordered to Burma, precisely because of the sea crossing issue.
So a long history of British insensitivity.
Systemic disrespect for Indian sensitivities, really. It all finally culminated in the massive uprising of 1857.
It's striking how all these diverse threads, economic hardship, political anger, administrative corruption, religious offense, were just waiting for that single explosive spark.
And that spark, the immediate trigger that ignited the whole thing, was one of the most infamous incidents. The introduction of the new Enfield rifle cartridges.
The greased cartridges.
Exactly. The rumor spread like wildfire through the sepoy lines, then out into civilian communities. The rumor was that these new cartridges were greased with animal fat cow and pig fat.
Offensive to both Hindus and Muslims.
Profoundly. For Hindus, the cow is sacred. For Muslims, the pig is unclean. And loading this new rifle required biting off the cartridge end to pour the powder in.
An act of profound religious defilement.
Unthinkable for them. This rumor, whether entirely accurate in every detail or not, acted as the perfect catalyst for that century of pent-up anger and suspicion.
And the refusal to use them started almost immediately.
It did. A key symbolic moment was at Barrackpore, near Kolkata, March 29, 1857. A sepoy named Mangal Pandey, just driven by outrage, rose in open revolt, refused the cartridges, attacked British officers.
His defiance was swiftly punished.
Captured, court-martialed, executed. But his sacrifice instantly became this potent symbol of resistance, of martyrdom. It ignited a flame that would soon spread.
Mangal Pandey was the match, but Meerut was where the fire truly caught hold.
Yes. April 24th, 1857. A unit of 85 sepoys at Meerut openly refused parade, refused the cartridges. The British command may be still underestimating the situation.
Responded harshly.
Incredibly harshly. All 85 court-martialed, 10 years hard labor, publicly humiliated, stripped of uniforms, shackled.
That must have backfired.
Massively. It was the ultimate provocation. On May 10th, their comrades in Meerut, furious, broke into the jail, freed the 85, freed other inmates, rose in full rebellion, attacked British officers, buildings.
And crucially, they marched on Delhi.
Right. Instead of dispersing, they marched straight for Delhi, the historic Mughal capital, about 60 kilometers away. This spontaneous march, driven by fury and a need for symbolic leadership, truly marks the start of the widespread revolt.
Transforming it from a mutiny into something much bigger.
A politically charged rebellion aimed right at the heart of British legitimacy in India.
And this march to Delhi leads to that fascinating decision, choosing Bahadur Shah II as the symbolic head.
Yeah, why rally around this old, basically powerless Mughal emperor? A British pensioner, really.
It was symbolic genius, though.
It really was. Bahadur Shah II, despite his lack of real power, still symbolized India's glorious past, a pre-British unity.
A legitimate figurehead.
For all the diverse rebels, sepoys, disgruntled princes, peasants, artisans, it wasn't about restoring his real power. It was about uniting these disparate factions under a common, recognized symbol.
Giving the revolt a political dimension.
Exactly. Elevating it beyond just a sepoy mutiny in the eyes of many Indians. Appealing to a shared identity against a common foreign oppressor.
And that's so critical because as soon as the sepoys reached Delhi, declared Bahadur Shah their emperor, the uprising exploded. It rapidly transformed into a popular rebellion.
Civilians joined in huge numbers.
Eagerly, people who had been suffering under all those British policies we discussed. This widespread civilian participation is fundamental to understanding the true nature and scale of 1857. It wasn't just the soldiers.
And their motivations were rooted in those same grievances.
Absolutely. Disgruntled landlords, petty chiefs who'd lost their status, peasants crushed by revenue systems and moneylenders, artisans whose livelihoods were destroyed. This was their chance to strike back.
And the chaos reflected that anger.
Direct, targeted attacks. British establishments, government buildings, police stations, law courts, symbols of colonial power. They destroyed revenue records, the proof of their debts, their tax burdens.
And they also attacked
the properties of moneylenders and zamindars, seen as collaborators. That really shows where the immediate resentment lay, focusing fury on those who'd profited from their misery. It highlights how deep and widespread the civilian discontent truly was.
Okay, let's zoom in on the major storm centers and leaders. Understanding these figures and locations really paints a clearer picture of the revolt's spread and its leadership.
Good idea. Where should we start?
Let's start at the symbolic heart, Delhi. Bahadur Shah II was the nominal head, the rallying cry, but the real military command fell to General Baq Khan,
Who was he?
a former Subadar, an Indian officer from the Bareilly contingent, a capable military leader who took charge of the rebel forces in the capital, organizing the defense against the British.
So he provided the military direction.
Exactly. Moving south to Kanpur, the natural leader there was Nana Sahib.
The adopted son of the last Peshwa.
Right. Deeply aggrieved, refused his title and pension, he managed to expel the English from Kanpur, proclaimed himself Peshwa, and importantly acknowledged Bahadur Shah as emperor, declaring himself governor.
Adding weight to the rebellion, and Kanpur saw that brutal siege.
Yes, where Sir Hugh Wheeler eventually surrendered with tragic consequences.
Lucknow, another major stronghold.
Erupted June 4th, 1857. Here, Begum Hazrat Mahal, wife of the deposed Nawab of Awadh, took charge. Immense courage.
And there was huge popular sympathy for the Nawab's family there.
Overwhelming. Her young son, Burgess Qadir, was proclaimed the new Nawab. What's really insightful about Lucknow is the administration they set up.
How so?
Important offices were shared equally by Muslims and Hindus, a remarkable display of unity and solidarity against the British. Henry Lawrence, the British resident, died during the fierce siege of the residency there.
Okay, who else? Bareilly.
In Bareilly, Rohilkhand, the leader, was Khan Bahadur. A former Mughal viceroy declared himself local ruler, set up his own administration.
And Faiz.
A powerful figure emerged there, Maulvi Ahmadullah. Spectrum calls him an outstanding leader, a light of rebellion.
Where is he from?
Interestingly, Madras. A respected Islamic scholar who traveled north preaching armed rebellion, fought stiff battles against the British, became a key leader in Awadh once the revolt broke out. Shows the spread beyond local issues.
And then, of course, Hansi.
Perhaps the most iconic figure, Rani Lakshmibai, deeply aggrieved by the doctrine of lapse denying her adopted son the throne.
Known for her bravery.
Immense bravery and skill. Fought fiercely when the British attacked Jhansi. Later joined forces with Tantia Tope.
Nana Sahib's general.
Yes, another brilliant, daring leader, known for guerrilla tactics. Their combined efforts were formidable.
And finally, Bihar.
Specifically Jagdishpur, an elderly zamindar, Kunwar Singh, already in his 70s.
Why did he join?
Held a grudge against the British for taking his estates. He didn't hesitate to join the sepoys when they reached Ara, became a powerful local leader, inspiring huge support among the peasantry. His age and spirit were symbolic.
It's remarkable, isn't it, connecting these stories? Diverse leaders, royalty, administrators, scholars, military men, different backgrounds, often local grievances.
But they united against a common enemy.
Exactly. Their collective efforts, even if not perfectly coordinated, created this formidable, unprecedented challenge to British authority across a huge part of India.
The emergence of leadership from those wronged by the British really underscores the popular nature of it all.
Definitely more than just a mutiny, a testament to that deep-seated resentment just waiting to erupt.
So despite this widespread revolt, this formidable challenge, the British did eventually suppress it. How?
Well, initially, they were taken completely by surprise. The scale, the ferocity, it shocked them, but they quickly mobilized.
Bringing overwhelming force.
Overwhelming force, superior organization, better logistics. They had a centralized command, vast resources, reinforcements that proved decisive.
Who are the key British generals involved?
Several played crucial roles. General John Nicholson, known for being aggressive, was key in recapturing Delhi, though he died in the process.
Right, Delhi was a turning point.
A major turning point. Then Henry Havelock and James Outram worked together to relieve the siege at Lucknow. But ultimately, it was the commander-in-chief, Sir Colin Campbell, who systematically recaptured Lucknow and other strongholds, disciplined, overwhelming force against more fragmented rebels.
And the recapture of Delhi in September 1857, that was followed by
brutal British atrocities. Once Delhi fell, they engaged in mass executions, widespread destruction, indiscriminate killings, targeting civilians, too, often on flimsy excuses.
Not just military victory, but revenge.
And instilling terror. By mid-1858, British control was largely reestablished in most centers, though resistance lingered.
But the retribution was harsh.
Brutal and far-reaching. Mass executions, often public, to send a message. Villages razed. A deliberate policy of terror to crush any future resistance, assert absolute dominance through fear. The scale of the violence was horrifying.
Which brings us to the crucial question. Given the widespread discontent, the intensity, the initial surge, Why did the revolt ultimately fail?
A really important question.
Yeah.
And there isn't one simple answer. It was multifaceted.
What was the first major reason?
Perhaps the most crucial, the lack of all India participation. Despite its intensity in certain areas, the revolt was mainly confined to northern and central India: Delhi, Awadh, Rohilkhand, Bundelkhand, Bihar.
But vast regions were untouched.
Exactly. Significant areas remained untouched, or even worse for the rebels, actively aided the British. Bengal, Bombay, Madras presidencies, Western Punjab, Sindh, Rajputana, Kashmir, most of Rajasthan, large parts of South India.
Why this lack of universal support? What about the ruling princes in those areas?
That's key. Many powerful ruling princes actively supported the British or stayed neutral. People like the Sindhi of Gwalior, Holkar of Indore, Nizam of Hyderabad, the Rajas of Patiala, Nabha, Jind, rulers of Kashmir, the Ranas of Nepal.
Their loyalty was crucial for the British.
Absolutely. Secured through treaties, self-interest, promises of continued power. It denied the rebels vital resources, locations, legitimacy. It allowed the British to concentrate forces, use loyal states as bases. It was a strategic alliance devastating for the rebellion.
And it wasn't just the princes, right? Not all classes joined either.
That's the second major point. All classes did not join. While broad sections did participate, crucial segments didn't. Many big zamindars, especially those who benefited from British settlements or feared revolutionary chaos, stayed loyal or actively helped the British.
What about merchants and moneylenders?
They often benefited from British policies, the new economic structures. They feared the disruption, the violence. They had a vested interest in British rule continuing, seeing it as guaranteeing order and property rights. So mostly neutral or supportive of the British.
And what about the educated Indians? This might surprise some listeners.
Yes, it's a nuanced point from spectrum.
Yeah.
Many prominent educated figures then, Dadabhai Naoroji, R.C. Dutt, even looking back at reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, they believed British rule, despite its flaws, was a necessary step towards modernization.
So they favored constitutional methods.
Generally, yes. Over-armed rebellion, which they often saw as regressive, likely leading to chaos, or restoring an old feudal order they themselves criticized. Their intellectual and moral support wasn't with the revolt, further isolating it.
Okay, so lack of universal participation, lack of full-class support. What about military factors?
A stark disparity in poor arms and equipment. The rebels fought with immense courage, but mostly basic old weapons, swords, spears, outdated firearms,
Compared to the British.
who had superior modern arms, Enfield rifles, effective artillery, better tack overall. Even with numbers, rebels were at a severe disadvantage in direct fights.
Logistical nightmare, too, presumably.
Absolutely. Lack of standard equipment, inadequate training. They couldn't sustain large-scale operations against a technologically superior force. Sheer will versus firepower.
And building on that, organization.
Fundamentally uncoordinated and poorly organized. A glaring lack of centralized command, effective communication between rebel groups. Bahadur Shah was symbolic, but no unified military or political strategy.
So everyone fought their own battles.
Largely, yes. Regional, isolated uprisings, pursuing immediate local goals, allowed the British to tackle them piecemeal, crush one center and move to the next.
Well, the British had unified command.
Exactly. Swift troop movements, coordinated suppression. This lack of coordinated leadership among rebels was a critical structural flaw.
Which perhaps points to an even deeper issue. No unified ideology.
Definitely related. They shared a common enemy, the British, but their ultimate aims were diverse, often conflicting.
Like what?
Some fought to restore old feudal privileges, some sought personal revenge for injustices, others aimed for religious restoration, an orthodox state.
So no clear vision for a post-British India.
Not really. Would it be Mughal? Maratha? Independent states? This lack of a coherent political or social strategy hampered coordination, long-term planning.
Yeah.
What would replace British rule? That wasn't clear.
But despite that lack of unified ideology, there was significant Hindu-Muslim unity, at least initially.
Immensely important to acknowledge that, yes, the Hindu-Muslim unity factor was strong at the start. Remarkable cooperation. Lucknow's administration sharing offices equally. Hindu sepoys fighting for Bahadur Shah, a Muslim emperor.
Driven by shared opposition.
Primarily, yes, against a common oppressor perceived as a threat to both ways of life. But as you said, it was reactive, lacking a deeper, pre-existing unified national ideology transcending religion.
And Spectrum makes a key point here about communalism.
A crucial takeaway. The events of 1857 demonstrated that the people and politics of India were not basically communal or sectarian before 1858. It was after the revolt that British divide and rule policies consciously fostered divisions, exploiting differences to prevent such unity challenging them again.
So the unity, while maybe not fully nationalist, was real and significant at the time.
Absolutely, and its breakdown later was partly a consequence of deliberate British policy.
This brings us neatly to the debate about the true nature of the revolt. Historians disagree strongly, don't they?
Hugely divergent views, not a simple narrative.
What's the traditional British view?
For many, especially writing soon after, it was dismissed as just a sepoy mutiny. Sir John Seeley called it wholly unpatriotic and selfish, with no native leadership and no popular support, conveniently downplaying it.
Completely. T.R. Holmes framed it as a conflict between civilization and barbarism. James Outram saw it narrowly as a Mohammedan conspiracy, trying to divide, basically minimizing it, denying its broader roots.
But as we've discussed, that view is widely seen as inaccurate now.
Yes, by many historians. It ignores the massive civilian participation, the deep underlying grievances far beyond the sepoys, the sheer scale. The mutiny was the spark, but it became a societal explosion.
So what's the opposing view?
The War of Independence perspective, most famously championed by V.D. Savarkar in his book, The Indian War of Independence of 1857.
What does that perspective emphasize?
The collective desire for freedom from foreign rule. The sacrifices made by diverse groups. It portrays it as India's first major nationalist struggle against colonial oppression. A conscious fight for freedom, a foundational moment.
And then there are more nuanced views in between.
Right. Historians like R.C. Majumdar and S.N. Sen argued it was not an organized national revolt in the modern sense. Majumdar added it was neither first nor national war of independence.
Acknowledging participation but questioning the national consciousness.
Exactly. Arguing motivations were too diverse, too localized for it to be fully national in the way we understand nationalism now. Eric Stokes saw it as somewhat elitist in character, leadership coming more from disgruntled elites.
So, for you listening, it's important to weigh these views.
Critically evaluate them. History is complex. While maybe not a fully national war in the modern sense, it was unequivocally more than just a sepoy mutiny. It involved huge civilian populations, reflected deep anti-British sentiment across a large area.
And regardless of how we label it, its consequences were massive.
Profound and lasting. This is where the revolt truly becomes a watershed moment. Despite failing to oust the British, it forced fundamental, irreversible shifts in British policy and administration, and it laid groundwork for future nationalism.
What was the most immediate consequence?
The end of company rule and assumption of power by the Crown. The British government, shocked by the revolt, realized the East India Company couldn't govern effectively, so the Government of India Act of 1858 was passed.
Transferring power directly.
Directly.
Yeah.
All governing power, administration, territory from the company to the British Crown. The pretense of commercial rule was over. India was under direct imperial control.
And new structures were created.
Yes. A new cabinet post in Britain. The Secretary of State for India, answerable to Parliament, assisted by a 15-member council. And in India, the Governor-General also became the Viceroy, the direct representative of the monarch.
A huge symbolic and administrative shift.
Completely changed the face of British rule in India.
And accompanying in this was Queen Victoria's proclamation.
Yes, the Proclamation of 1858, issued directly to the princes, chiefs, and people of India. A strategic masterpiece, really, designed to pacify and secure loyalty after the trauma of the revolt.
What did it promise?
Several key things, aimed right at the grievances that fueled the rebellion. First, an end to territorial expansion.
No more annexations like Awadh or Hansi.
That was the promise. Respect princely states, their dignity, treaties. A shift from Dalhousie's aggressive policies to subordinate union, not annexation. A clear move to win over the princes, make them loyal allies.
What else? Religious freedom.
A pledge of religious freedom. Assurance of non-interference in religious practices and customs. A direct response to those socio-religious fears about missionaries, reforms, conversions, trying to calm fears, rebuild trust.
And promises about equality.
It promised equal treatment, equal opportunity, irrespective of race or creed, theoretically allowing Indians into higher administration.
But the reality...
The reality, like with the Indian Civil Service Act of 1861, was that higher services remained largely British. Racial discrimination continued, maybe even intensified. So the proclamation sounded good, but its main aim was strategic. Calm fears, secure allegiance, reestablish legitimacy. Many promises weren't fully kept in spirit.
Another critical consequence was the army reorganization.
Absolutely. Sweeping reorganization of the army. The British learned a terrifying lesson about relying too heavily on Indian sepoys, especially the Bengal army.
So, changes to prevent another uprising.
Drastic changes. The proportion of European troops was massively increased from about 14% pre-1857 to roughly one-third overall. A fixed ratio of Europeans to Indians was set, 1 to 2 in Bengal, 2 to 5 in Madras, Bombay.
Ensuring European dominance in numbers.
And in firepower. A strict European monopoly over critical departments, artillery, tanks, key armed corps. Indians excluded from high-tech, high-impact areas.
And officer ranks.
Indians deliberately kept out of officer ranks positions of command until 1918. Command and strategy stayed firmly British. It wasn't just military efficiency, it was about absolute control, preventing future revolts, institutionalizing racial discrimination in the army.
This brings us to a really significant and ultimately tragic consequence.
Yeah.
The intensification of divide and rule.
Yes. The British saw that initial Hindu-Muslim unity as an existential threat. So after the revolt, they began consciously, systematically fostering divisions, actively using one community or class against another, favoring certain groups for jobs or land, highlighting past conflicts, perceived grievances to create animosity, deepen fault lines, playing gentry against peasantry.
Leading to
what Spectrum calls an irremediable deterioration in social cohesion, sowing deep seeds of discord, mistrust, tragically contributing to future communal tensions and divisions that persisted, a cynical but effective strategy for long-term control.
And economically, did things change after the direct crown rule?
While direct territorial conquest mostly stopped, the revolt paradoxically opened a new chapter of more systematic economic exploitation. The immediate fear of rebellion subsided, replaced by what you could call systematic economic loot.
Exploitation by the empire, not just a company.
Exactly. India's resources, raw materials like cotton, indigo, agricultural produce, increasingly siphoned off to feed Britain's industrial revolution. India's own industries suppressed or dismantled to create a captive market for British goods.
Maximizing profits for the crown.
Precisely. Transforming India into a classic colonial economy designed to benefit the imperial power at profound cost to Indians. This systematic drain continued for decades.
But finally, despite its failure, the revolt did have a positive impact on the future.
Absolutely. A profound impact on the nationalist movement. It served as a powerful, undeniable source of inspiration for later movements and leaders fighting for freedom.
Even if it wasn't national in the modern sense.
Its sheer scale, participation, defiant spirit against foreign rule became this powerful, enduring memory. It instilled a sense of shared grievance, shared resistance, showed collective action was possible.
Contributing to a unified Indian identity.
Significantly. This shared experience of suffering, defiance, struggle against a common oppressor contributed to the nascent idea of India as something unified by that colonial experience. It sparked seeds of future nationalism, laid a crucial, bloody foundation for the long road to independence. A catalyst, a brutal lesson, but deeply influential.
So recapping this monumental event, it's incredibly complex.
Truly multifaceted. We started by seeing it wasn't sudden, but a culmination of a century of simmering discontent, economic exploitation, political annexation, administrative failures, socio-religious fears, sepoy grievances.
All building up until the spark of the greased cartridges.
Igniting the revolt at Meerut, the march to Delhi, choosing Bahadur Shah as a symbol. Then civilians joining en masse, driven by their own suffering. Storm centers rising with leaders like Nana Sahib, Begum Hazrat Mahal, Rani Lakshmi Bai, Kunwar Singh.
But ultimately failing. Why, again, the key reasons?
Lack of all India participation. Crucial groups like princes in some classes not joining. Poor arms and equipment. Poor coordination and organization. No single unified ideology beyond opposing the British.
Though that initial Hindu-Muslim unity was notable.
Very notable. And its later erosion partly due to deliberate British divide and rule.
And the consequences were transformative.
End of company rule. Direct crown control via the 1858 Act. Queen Victoria's proclamation with its promises, often unkept. Army reorganized for British dominance. Divide and rule intensified. Economic exploitation became more systematic.
Yet crucially, it inspired future nationalism.
Served as a powerful symbol of resistance, contributed to a sense of shared Indian identity, proving large-scale struggle was possible.
The Revolt of 1857 truly was a watershed moment. Reshaped British rule, planted those enduring seeds of nationalist aspirations.
It's a testament, isn't it, to how accumulated grievances, even without a perfect plan, can ignite a subcontinent and change its destiny forever.
Indeed. What 1857 really laid bare, maybe more than anything, was the fragility of seemingly absolute power when faced with the collective will of a people pushed too far. The question for us today, looking back, isn't just what happened.
What fundamental truths it still reveals?
About governance, about human resistance, truths that still resonate.
A powerful thought to end on. Thank you all for joining us for this exploration of the Revolt of 1857, part of the Book Triangle podcast and our Navigating Modern India series.
We'll continue to unravel these crucial topics, covering all the chapters of modern India by spectrum in future sessions. We hope it helps with exam preparation and just general understanding of India's incredible past.
Stay tuned for our next session as we continue our journey navigating the fascinating currents of modern Indian history.